You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com. I got an interesting message through the soxinthebasement.com website. You can always send us messages and leave phone calls and give your opinion and everything. We brought that up before on the show through soxinthebasement.com. I had a listener reach out and ask me, Ed, what was the best way to listen to the show for me? They were basically asking, like, would you rather I listen through Spotify or YouTube? And I'll be honest with you, I told him, like, it doesn't really matter. But it is a little different, and I found myself explaining it, and I asked why, and he just wanted to make sure we got the most amount of credit, which I think is sweet, and I think
that is nice.
Wonderful,
thank you for that.
Right?
Yeah, so, I just assumed you got a message that somebody was mad at me again.
No. Normally it's Ed sucks, but now this person wants to find a way to support us in the best way possible. So the way I explain it to him is, first of all, I don't care how you listen. There's a million ways. In fact, if you want to find more ways to listen, you go to soxinthebasement.com, and it lists all these different apps that you can use, right? But we are on YouTube video-wise. We every once in a while, like on Mondays, we'll do videos. We're not doing it for the next couple of weeks because the holiday's coming up. It's very hard to get people to come sit in the basement, and I'm going to be out of town at one point over the next couple of weeks. And then we'll get back to more videos on Mondays coming out on that YouTube feed. But there's always the audio feed on there. So the way it works is that if you're using like a reputable podcast app, like a Spotify or an Apple Podcast, or you're listening through the website, I get like what's called an IAB certified download if you listen to the whole show. This is like the gold standard. This is like, it's really hard to get those. It's very hard for podcasts to get that. The Internet Advertising Bureau standard for a complete, real download. It makes sure that you actually listen to the show. It makes sure that like you didn't spend like 15 seconds and leave. It's the standard. On the other hand, a lot of people move into YouTube these days. YouTube doesn't tell me how long you listen for or watch it for, but people are starting to move the YouTube so much. I mean, Google Podcasts got rid of Google Podcasts and just folded into YouTube because this is becoming the place where everybody like discovers podcasts now. It's on YouTube for some reason, even if it's an audio show. So I still see those numbers. I add those numbers to the other numbers to figure out who's listening. So I don't care how you listen, but it was an interesting question. I've never been asked that by a listener before. And my response was essentially, I don't care how you listen. It counts. All right. I just appreciate you listening. I think it's awesome. But yeah, it's a little different, but it really doesn't affect very much for me. Right?
It's one of those where we appreciate every one of our listeners and everybody who takes time to listen to our opinions about the White Sox. I mean, it's great that you guys do it, so we appreciate it however you're getting us. And just proactively, I'm sorry for whatever I say in this show. Or for my face on YouTube, or for my voice, or, anything, really.
That's awesome. I'm thinking about going to the game this weekend to see them play the Rockies. My sister just went to the makeup game against the Braves. Chris Sale goes out there. The White Sox throw a bullpen day and win 1-0. That's improbable. Sox Nerd's going to cover that later on in the show. That shows you that anything can happen over 162 games. If I go this weekend, I'll be at Cork and Kerry at the park. It is the place to go pregame, in-game, post-game. If I'm going, I'm bringing my kids. It's fun for the whole family. They got great food. They got options for the little ones. They get the food out fast. It's good. It's at the right price. You're over at the game in time to see the start of it. Big, beautiful bar with every selection you could imagine. Local craft beers, familiar favorites, spirits and wines, indoor-outdoor seating, a great gathering place after the game, win or lose. Make it part of your White Sox game day experience. See more at corkandkerry.com. Let's talk about the roster as it is today, because I know everybody's focusing on the draft coming up. I know everybody's wondering who they're going to trade. And I think that you form opinions of this team that, and sometimes those opinions may change. Like you might have had somebody who was red hot and you're like, oh, this guy's the future. But is he now, as we sit here at the end of June? Or somebody that was ice cold and now they have like a couple of good weeks. Are they still somebody relevant that you want to keep on your team? So I kind of wanted to look at some of the guys. Like an example of this is Korey Lee. Like I look at Korey Lee right now as a guy who's a very capable catcher. He's clearly the best catcher on my team. He clearly deserves as much playing time as he can get, and he's being underutilized. I mean, I think that I share that opinion with pretty much all White Sox fans. I think it would be very hard to find somebody who would say, no, Martin Maldonado needs more time, Ed.
No. I think one of the things about Korey Lee is because he this is his first real full season doing this, other than a couple of cups of coffee, one with the White Sox, one with the Astros. We don't know Korey Lee's ceiling yet, right? He is a rookie. We're seeing the emergence of a very capable major league catcher. It's, but is the question, is his future Martin Maldonado, where he's going to be a guy that's revered for his glove, but his bat's going to fall way off? Is he James McCann, who kind of falls under that same category, maybe less so? Or is he a guy that, some team, whether it's the White Sox or some other team, even as this guy's in his 30s, is going to sit there and go, you know what? We still got Korey Lee back there. He can still receive the ball and he doesn't kill you with the bat. We don't know yet. But for right now, this is a guy that the Sox have invested in, and good. Let's let this play out, right? That is a good example, right?
He's hitting .238 right now. He's had a terrible last month where he's hitting under the Mendoza line. He does get sporadic playing time, and a lot of that falls on his use and how Pedro is probably just not giving him a chance to get into a groove. But he is dipping. And I look at Korey Lee as like one of these guys is the eventual long-term backup. Like I think that he's part of a tandem of catchers that you hope is led by Edgar Quero, who is doing so well down in the minor leagues, hits the ball a ton, and is projected to be a better player by scouts, and that you're just waiting for him to get there. But I do like Lee. I do see him as a part of the team. I don't think he's ever going to be the guy that has the lion's share of starts behind the plate. So maybe he does need to adjust a little bit to sporadic playing time, because he may never be that guy. If Quero gets here, I don't know if Lee's really getting 120 games as a catcher or 130 games as a catcher. He's probably not getting that. He's probably a long-term backup. He's clearly a baseball player. And every time I look at him, I remember what James Fox of Future Sox said about him when we were talking in the preseason, in spring training. The idea that, like, this guy is a first-round draft choice. He does have an awful lot of tools that will make him stick in the majors. And if he can just be competent at the plate, then he's going to be a Major League Baseball player for a long time. I believe that's the case. But I also, I think it's sometimes you're so angry with the way he's being used. And he's one of the many examples of Pedro being a really bad manager. But I also don't think he's an all-star catcher in the making. I've tempered my expectations of him to, I just want a professional, competent, really good defensive player who can throw out guys. He's a threat with that arm behind the plate. He's got the best pop time in the league right now. So my dad asked me, what's pop time? Because he saw it on the broad. He called me up. He's like, what is pop time? I'm like, pop time's how quick he gets up and gets that ball out to second base. And he's like, oh, and he's the best at that? I'm like, supposedly, he's the best at that right now. So he's got a lot of really good characteristics. But I think at this point, end of June, I look at him as he's part of my team. He's not somebody I'm hanging my hat on. And on a good team, he's hitting at the bottom of the order in a backup role.
But here's the thing, okay? And you referenced his pop time. And what you can't do on a baseball team is sit there and say every position player needs to be evaluated the same way. There's a lot of value to Korey Lee having that fastest pop time in the league and being what he is behind the plate that makes up for what could be very pedestrian offense. And look, the power is there. The 7 home runs in 63 games is, a reasonably decent number. Yeah, the .238 batting average, but again, he's a rookie, that's going to fluctuate. Now, will he ever be an all-star catcher? No. But do the White Sox need to have an all-star catcher? No. They need to have a catcher who is good behind the plate, who handles the pitching staff well, and who doesn't kill you at the dish when he's up offensively. No, you can look at Korey Lee, and I agree with you. I'm not disagreeing with you, but when you look at somebody like Korey Lee and you evaluate the total package, and I think that's part of what you have to do here is you have to evaluate everything. Okay, where does this guy fit? Korey Lee is maybe not a building block of the team, but Korey Lee is a guy that if Edgar Quero takes extra time because he's not sufficient behind the plate and he's not, or there's something about him that still needs some time, if Korey Lee does get, say, the lion's share of the playing time this year, which he really ought to over Martin Maldonado, and the fact that there's nobody else really out there to that you want to advance. And even if it's something where, say, next year, if Quero's not quite ready and you go into a season next year with Korey Lee behind the plate and you're expecting him to catch 120 games, if he does what he's doing right now, defensively and offensively, and he is batting at the bottom of your lineup, and if the rest of the lineup is good, which the rest of this lineup is not, then Korey Lee becomes a viable starting catcher, okay? Doesn't have to be an all-star, but he's worth holding on to, because finding a guy who's going to lead the league in pop time, that's a stat that when you look at the big picture of catchers is maybe more important than whether or not he's hitting 250 versus 238, or whether or not he, if he had a few more games here, he'd have 9 home runs, or would he just be stuck on the 7 because, he's going to be a streaky guy.
Sox in the Basement listeners, for exterior windows, doors, patio doors, and storm doors, look no further than Window and Door Superstore of Oak Forest. It's been one of those summers where I've noticed the windows that I like in my house and the ones that need to be replaced. Because you get like a 95-degree day, and the next day it's like 72, and I want to pop everything open and let air in, and it should be simple. I mean, what the heck? It's 2024. If you're struggling with your window, if your door doesn't turn into a screen door very easily, no high-pressure sales, Window and Door Superstore of Oak Forest have you come to them instead of sitting in your kitchen or your living room. Everything's on display in their showroom. Forget pictures in a book, see it in person. Owner in showroom and on site with their Window and Door Superstore installers. They do not farm out the work. They've been doing it that way for 40 years in Oak Forest since 1985 with all major brands custom made and no stock items for a perfect fit. Visit Window and Door Superstore of Oak Forest today, a half block east of 159th and Ridgeland at 6280 159th Street. See more at windowdooroakforest.com. Let's talk about Andrew Vaughn and Gavin Sheets, because I mentioned it in the last show, right at the beginning of it, and then we got into the topic of discussion that we were on. I mentioned that you cannot have both of these guys on your team moving forward. I think if you're able to move one of them in a deadline deal or in the offseason, you do it, because you have two guys that are basically the same guy, Ed. Andrew Vaughn's hitting 234 with a 659 OPS, and Gavin Sheets is hitting 243 with a 747. Sheets is slightly better. You want to know why that is? Because Gavin Sheets has been hot over the last week or so, and Andrew Vaughn has been cold. In fact, when you actually look at their splits, and this is just amazing, Andrew Vaughn over the last 28 days, according to Baseball Reference, is a 315 batting average and an 847 OPS. Gavin Sheets over those last 28 days, a 247 batting average and a 700 OPS. But over the last 7 days, Gavin Sheets 400 with a 950 OPS. Andrew Vaughn over the last 7 days, 182 with a 409 OPS. I know those are a lot of numbers, but I'll just put it in layman's terms. When Andrew Vaughn is doing well, Gavin Sheets is not. When Gavin Sheets is doing well, Andrew Vaughn is not. One hits lefty, one hits righty, one has 9 home runs, one has 7. One of them has a B WAR that is 0.0 this year. The other one has a negative 0.3. One has a career B WAR of 0.7, the other one a negative 1.7. They're both replacement level players and nothing better than that. They both would hit below the 6th spot, like 6, 7, 8, or 9 in a lineup. If it was a good team, they would never hit higher than 6th on a good team, but they're hitting high in this team because of how bad we are. And I'll make one more comparison to both of these guys. I'll talk about a guy who for his career was a negative 0.9 WAR, had a 218 batting average and a 710 OPS, which is essentially right there in the middle of these two guys that I just mentioned who are basically the same player. And ask yourself, was Daniel Palka somebody you were building around in the last rebuild? Because all you have right now.
For a minute there, people thought that he was.
Yeah, but I think the reasonable people in us knew that he was just a fun guy to have on a bad team, and that's all these guys are. They're guys now over years.
Wait,
have
these
just
guys are
demonstrated
fun?
They're essentially Daniel Palka at the plate.
Are you sure they're fun? I'm not having any fun.
No, I'm not having any
fun
fun either. Palka was fun because we were all accepting the losing, right? We all knew that we were going to suck, and we all knew these good players were coming, and we all thought all that had to happen was the prospects just had to come through, and we were just going to plug and play and win. And that was stupid, and that's why giving away all of your good players for prospects is stupid, and we all should have learned that lesson, although some people have not. But I'm telling you right now, from a hitting standpoint, there's no difference between outfielder and designated hitter Daniel Palka and what Andrew Vaughn and Gavin Sheets have done for their careers, while one of them plays out of position in the outfield, and both of them have done that at some point during their career, or stands at first base.
This is just, and there's a long line of them, and I don't really feel like going through the history, but there's a long line of Kenny Williams, Rick Hahn draft choices that were rushed to the majors probably before they were ready, and I'm not sure Gavin Sheets even falls under that, to be honest with you. But when they were both brought up, they were both brought up under the circumstances of, we have these two guys who are first basemen by trade. They tried Andrew Vaughn all over the diamond, right, to try and figure out a spot to put him. And we were told he was the future, and we're still kind of living off of that hype. And from a contractual standpoint, Vaughn's been in a little bit longer than Sheets. He's going to reach free agency a year earlier. He's more expensive right now, if that makes a difference. But you're right. I mean, having these two guys who are basically the same dude, you sit there and you go, what's the market for either of them? And Vaughn got super duper hot, like you said, for a while there, over the last month. It's disparate because he is, there was a minute there where Andrew Vaughn really looked like the guy that we were sort of waiting on.
But that's baseball. That's baseball. That's over 162 games. Everybody has a hot streak. Everybody has a cold streak. What are you over a giant sample size? He's got just under 1,800 career at-bats. His B-WAR is 0.7. His on-base percentage over all those at-bats is 310, and his OPS is 723, which is like a point or two below what the average OPS is in Major League Baseball over that same time period. He's literally a 4A player. He's a guy who can come up from AAA, play in the majors, but not do very much else.
Yeah, he is. There's a long list of guys that he is following the footsteps of, and they are just, a lot of them are forgotten to history, but a lot of them were high draft picks. A lot of them were guys that had a lot of expectations and never really delivered. I would submit that Gavin Sheets is probably fulfilling what his floor and ceiling were coming up as a second round pick. I mean, he's also a high round draft pick, but Vaughn, one of the things that has me bothered about him is the 71 strikeouts. He's second only to Paul DeYoung, who is known as a guy that is going to strike out way too much, but also hit the ball out of the ballpark a lot more than maybe you think he's going to. And his 14 home runs versus 87 strikeouts he's kind of, fitting with his career. Vaughn is a guy who struck out 71 times, only walked 17 times, has only hit 9 homers, and a lot of that came in that hot streak. And he is, like you said, he's a streaky guy. There are guys that are like that all over baseball. His overall stats, his hot streak clearly do not outweigh the cold streaks because he's just replacement level. Sheets, being a left-hander, has probably more value. He's walked a lot. He's got 32 walks, which is actually pretty admirable for, a lot of things, but he leads the team by a long shot in that regard, right? So there's something to be said that Gavin Sheets might be a little bit of the better of the two if you factor in that his hot and cold streaks, at least this year, have been less jarring.
You can't say that you're not giving them both an opportunity to break out or get better. Andrew Vaughn leads the entire team this year with 311 plate appearances.
Right.
And Gavin Sheets is second with 276. These are the guys that come to the plate more than any other player on the team. And I think you know what they are at this point. You can look at their last couple years. You can look at this. They are what they are. If somebody says to you, we need a left-handed bat to round out our bench in the postseason that has a little bit of pop, and we're going to give you anything, you pretty much should take it. If you find any upside in what's being offered, because in reality, you're blocking other potential players that may end up better than these two guys. Because by having them both in the lineup on a regular basis, again, the two highest plate appearances on the team, you are essentially blocking an outfielder from coming up, or somebody sitting in the DH spot, or somebody getting more at bats, when in reality you have two guys that are essentially the same player, one on the left side, one on the right, and both of which should be standing at first base as their primary position. And so the question then becomes, what kind of player do you think you could get for them? And I really feel like what the White Sox would do here is they would love to trade Sheets. Because it's not because they think Vaughn's better. It's because, again, it goes back to the idea that this is a community baseball team that happens to play in Major League Baseball and is a PR machine mainly for the owner, and then sometimes kind of serves itself. And they don't want to sit there and tell you that this guy that even the GM didn't draft, right? Getz didn't draft Vaughn, right? But this guy that they've centered so much marketing around, They don't want to just admit that they let him go. I think that you could trade either one of them. I think you could trade both. I'd be ready to move on because there's nothing that these two guys bring to you that you can't go find in free agency in a $6 or $7 million free agent signing, or a guy even at the level of Tommy Pham, who you got in the back end of free agency, to be a professional bat that came in. There's nothing these guys bring that's any different from the 50 or 60 hitters that'll be sitting out there looking for a job in the back end of the offseason next year. Sox in the Basement listeners, when you combine State Farm home and auto insurance, you save an average of $889. State Farm agent John Harrell is ready to help you combine home and auto and save in Chicagoland. Call him today, 708-481-4500. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Average annual per household savings based on a 2019 national survey by State Farm of new policyholders who reported savings by switching to State Farm.
There's guys that are in other systems that have not gotten opportunities that these guys have had that might still have a ceiling that is higher than what they've showed. There's guys out there that have some possibilities that can come up and be a replacement level guy right now, but maybe have more room for growth. Vaughn and Sheets having had now multiple seasons in the majors to show what they can do. Like you said, we're starting to get a feel that this is maybe what they are, because Andrew Vaughn did not come out and really turn a corner this year to become a next level offensive player. Gavin Sheets, given regular at-bats for the first time in his career, is showing you that he can be, at least on the strong side of a platoon, he can definitely be a viable player for somebody. And you're right, let's say the Yankees, who are in desperate need of a first baseman, would love to have a left-handed hitting first baseman. They just picked up J.D. Davis off the scrap heap from the Oakland A's to be the right-handed complement. But if they don't think Anthony Rizzo is ever going to come back and do anything, if they think Rizzo's done, wouldn't Gavin Sheets look attractive to them, sitting there going, okay, this guy's at replacement or a little bit above. He's got some pop. His pop will play a lot better at Yankee Stadium than it plays anywhere else because of because that's what left-handed bats do there. And he's better than Ben Rice. That we trust him more than Ben Rice, a rookie that we don't really know what he is, but we can sit there and say, hey, you know what, Gavin Sheets he's a major leaguer and we can do this. And the Yankees would be glad, I'm sure, to give up something that fits what Chris Getz needs to build a White Sox roster better than a guy in Gavin Sheets who really shouldn't be playing the outfield. And it's no knock on his hustle or his effort or his desire, but he just doesn't get the job done. And get something back.
Get an athletic prospect, a young athletic prospect that's a couple years away from him that you think you can develop, that has more versatility and defensively and can play it, because the logjam of corner outfielders and first baseman has to be undone.
Or get a pitcher for him.
An arm. I mean, imagine if you turn Gavin Sheets into somebody that eventually comes out of your bullpen. I don't care if they're coming out in the sixth inning, but somebody who's actually part of your team down the line is a viable bullpen piece. I'd be okay with that right now.
Yeah, I remember, one of the best trades in White Sox history was Korey Lee for Scott Pisednik, who was regarded at the time as being not even a fourth outfielder, right? And, a guy who could run the bases but wasn't much use elsewhere. And Jose Vizcaino.
And both of those worked out very well.
Vizcaino. Jose Vizcaino was on the Astros that year. Luis Vizcaino, who was just, he became a somewhat reliable arm in a championship run.
You were in the Vizcaino ballpark there. I like that.
I was in the Vizcaino ballpark.
You were close.
I had the right Vizcaino area code. I just didn't have the right number.
Listen, here's a funny thing. When I look at these two guys, and I'm scrolling through Sox stats right now as we're talking, and I look at the start that Moncada had before he got hurt. And I was thinking to myself, here's a guy that I keep saying I got to get rid of because I don't want to pay him $25 million next year because he's not worth $25 million. But if you look at his last couple of years, for all the grief that Yoan Moncada gives, he's been a better hitter than both of these guys we've been discussing.
100%.
Like if Yoan Moncada was on the money that these guys are getting paid, I'd be like, keep him around. Right?
Oh yeah.
He's out because of the money. But but these guys, these two players have never reached the heights of what Moncada's done over the last 4 or 5 years, even with his ups and downs. He's been a more viable player. He hits for a higher average. He generally sits above the league average in OPS. Sometimes he dips below it. It depends on what the season is. All right. He I don't know if he probably ends up with about the same amount of home runs, and he plays a better defensive position than what they can play. And I'm ready for him to leave because he's overpaid. Like, you're going to buy him out for $5 million rather than pay him 25 or 27, whatever it ends up being. It's a crazy number. Is it 24 and then you add 5 to it because he's really going to cost you 29 next year?
Something like that, yeah. Well, no, he would be. You pay the buyout.
You
amount,
pay the buyout, right? But I mean, it's a huge number, and it's a reason why you don't want to keep him around. But when we're just thinking we're taking the salary out of it, and we're just looking at player skill. These guys are not the top of the heap on this team. They've been thrust into the role of having to be the top of the heap because Robert was injured for a while. There's no real talent in the lineup. And so they're just like de facto sitting in the middle of the order. Benintendi hasn't really done anything all year long. I mean, he's in the Sun-Times or wherever he was. I don't think he was in the Sun-Times. It was the Sun-Times that made fun of it. He was at his locker telling all the reporters about how it isn't as bad as it looks. The guy who's hitting at the Mendoza line, making $75 million over 5 years, doesn't think it's as bad as it looks. When you're on a historic run to possibly have the worst record over 162 games of any team in the history of Major League Baseball, he's like, it's not as bad as it looks.
Has anybody given Andrew Benintendi a set of tortoise shell glasses like they did for Wild Thing Vaughn in Major League?
Listen, with responses like that, he's ready to debate in a presidential debate. I mean,
yeah.
He's going to be a perfect politician one day with that stuff. Holy cow.
Mercy. I mean, I'm wondering, he's struggling at the plate, and he's talking about things not being as bad as they look. I don't think the guy can see.
Fast forward to 20 years from now, and he's like a senator or something like that, or he's got a future with that kind of delusion.
Senator Benintendi, we're in the midst of a nuclear winter. We're in the midst of a nuclear winter. The fallout has crushed agriculture and torched the skies. Well, but it's not as bad as it looks.
Not as bad as it looks. That music means only one thing, the Sox Nerd. Dave Marin joins us once again here on Sox in the Basement. He puts all those wonderful tidbits and trivia and nuggets up on the scoreboard at the rate. And then he comes on this show once a week to give us even more. And he's brought to you by the Village of Lamont. Want to experience a downtown with real history, great eats and drinks, and green spaces filled with adventure? Visit the Village of Lamont. Shop, dine, drink, explore. It's incredible. They have a food truck festival today, the day this episode comes out, on Saturday. And then every Tuesday now, they have a farmer's market that kicks off at 4 p.m. into the evening, and around 7 o'clock it ends. So everybody always wants to go to a farmer's market, but they're at work. They have the afternoon into evening farmer's market in downtown Lamont every Tuesday. Check out everything they have going on at lamontdowntown.com. Nerd, what do you got for me today?
Chris, there is nothing I love more than a 1-0 game, and we got a doozy on Thursday afternoon, proving that something enthralling can come out of even a season like this. Thanks to Luis Robert Jr.'s first-inning homer, the White Sox bested Atlanta, and that cut up Chris Sale 1-0 in an interleague makeup game at Guaranteed Rate Field. Thanks to a log I started years ago and that I have tweaked many times since, I can tell you Thursday was the 265th 1-0 win in White Sox history. That number is 267 if you count the 1-0 postseason wins in the 1959 and 2005 World Series. This was the 32nd homer-only victory in White Sox history. Luis Robert Jr. has accounted for the last 3 of these wins: Thursday, September 23rd, 2023 in Boston, and September 24th, 2021 in Cleveland. Thursday's blast makes Robert the only player in White Sox history with 3 homers and 1-0 wins, breaking a tie with Taffy Wright, Jim Landis, Ed Herman, Carlton Fisk, and Frank Thomas. Thursday was just the second time the Sox got a homer in the first inning of a 1-0 win. The last time occurred August 22nd, 1993 in Minnesota, when Thomas went deep in the opening stanza of what proved to be Jack McDowell's 20th victory. In Thursday's game, Chad Kuhl started and went just 3 innings. That is tied for the shortest outing by a starter in a 1-0 Sox victory. The only other 3-inning start in a 1-0 win came on September 9th, 1966, when Gary Peters had to depart because of a hip injury. Speaking of pitching, the Sox used 5 hurlers Thursday: Cool, Justin Anderson, Jared Schuster, John Brebbia, and Michael Kopech. This marked the second time the Sox had used that many pitchers in a 1-0 win, with the first coming on September 24th, 2021 in Cleveland. Before I get to my zinger, a reminder, you can access my blog on soxatthebasement.com, and there is plenty of nerd material on Twitter and on the scoreboard at Guaranteed Rate Field. My zinger, the most amazing homer-only 1-0 win belongs exclusively, or almost exclusively, to Hall of Famer Early Wynn. On May 1st, 1959, Wynn homered in the 8th inning and went the distance while fanning 14 and walking 7 in a 1-0 win over the Red Sox at Comiskey Park. That's it, Chris. More than you probably wanted to know about Luis Robert Jr., Ed Herman, Chad Kuhl, and especially 1-0 White Sox wins. Oh, and thank you, Chris, for letting me share my passion of 1-0 White Sox wins with your listeners.
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always on soxinthebasement.com.